If you're thinking, how does somebody pastor a church in Oregon and Arizona? The trick is you just do a bad job. I'm kidding. Hey, there are so many young people here. And I want to tell you something. Churches will always say, like, we just want young people. That's not true. You guys are terrifying to preach to. And here's why. Your generation of people fact checks everything. I know this because I've got a little boy who is 13 and he is now moving into his fact-checking phase of life. And so I tell you that, and to borrow words from Bryson, this is not in my notes, but if you think about every social movement that happens in the country, it happens with say 16 is kind of coming into it, maybe 24 is kind of coming out of it. But that demographic, big social changes happen in the country. Every generation, every decade you go back and you look, and what you see is that a group of young people who agree on something and it really passionately pursue it. I like that we're in the series. I say I consider this kind of one of my churches. I hope that's okay. I know it's weird. You don't ever be the guy who's like shows up and knows everybody's name. They're like, that feels creepy. But I love this church. I love Bryson. I love everything that you guys have got going on here. I don't want to get too distracted, but I do want to finish this thought, is that sometimes if we're not careful, we become militant before we become fully informed. Does that make sense? Like sometimes we believe just the piece of something so much that we like go headlong into militance before we're fully informed. And I think there is a combination of the wisdom that comes with age and the excitement that comes with youth. But I love the energy that God has constantly put into the hands of irresponsibly young people. Because if it was up to older, wiser people, like, God, they're not ready. And for generations, God is just like, here you go. I do have a rodeo background. And it seems like every time somebody finds that out, I get asked one question, and I have to just be honest with you guys. I hate the question, and maybe you've already asked it in your own head, but, oh, you rodeo, okay. Do you, like little kids in the airport, do you ride bulls? No. And they're like, oh, thought you're a real cowboy. I'm not a bull rider. I know a few. And let me tell you this about bull riders. They are tiny little people. And the reason they put out such a bravado of being tough is that they're compensating for being almost 5 feet tall. I watched a show years ago about a lady whose husband died, and they found out that she had been slowly feeding him antifreeze. And yeah, that's a good way to start a sermon, I know. But they're like, oh, wait a minute. Come to find out, she had previously lost a husband under weird circumstances and had never been solved. So they went back, and it gets worse. You thought that was creepy. It gets worse. They go back and they exhume the previous husband. And what do you think they find in where his organs had been? Yeah, you guessed it. So what they found was that truth had been buried. Unknown details of a story had gotten buried for years. And it wasn't until they were able to go dig that back up that they discovered the truth about this lady. In the cholera outbreaks in the 18th and 19th century, there was an outbreak, whether it had actually happened or whether it was just an outbreak of belief that it had happened, of people being buried alive because they would go into this coma and then they would recover. But sometime between the two, the thought was that people were getting buried alive. Taphophobia, for you guys that are Googling this, it's the irrational fear of being buried alive. And I would argue there is no such thing as irrational. If it comes to the fear of I think anything that you do to avoid being buried alive seems super rational. It seems like the most rational thing I don't know how you can have an irrational fear of being buried. So what they did was they developed what's called a safety coffin. I'm not kidding. You can look this up. A safety coffin. And what a safety coffin came equipped with was a string. So that in the event that you found yourself buried prematurely, you could pull the string and it went up and it was tied to a bell, and the bell was secured outside these coffins, and as would happen, the wind would blow. And they're like, we got one. And then they would, no, it wasn't. It was a false alarm. So they had to put covers over them, the whole thing. But I think in my life, there have been times I was raised in church. I was a preacher's kid. I'm a preacher's nephew. I'm a preacher's grandson. My brother was like a youth pastor. I think it was just part of the curse of my family name. But one of the things that come with that is I struggle with things that should be sacred. things like funerals and weddings, like we grew up in them. There's nothing sacred about them. And I have to really struggle with that because now as an adult, I'm like, okay, I get the significance. But I always struggled with treating sacred things as though they were sacred. It's just a preacher's kid things. Abortion's kids, I don't know what I'm talking about. It's just part of the package. But what would happen is occasionally I would hear stories in the Bible, and maybe you guys have gone through this already. You hear stories in the Bible, and instead of going, tell me more about that, you would go, yeah, I heard that one. How many of you guys during the scripture reading thought, yeah, I've heard this before? And if we're not careful, what can happen is we can bury it. And we bury it so deep that it's hard to even go back and really examine what we're reading. It's almost though like we read something and the curiosity, for me, here's what happened. I read this story a few years ago. Bryson asked when we were talking about coming and speaking, which I'm super honored that you would ask. But he was like, man, I've listened to almost all of the stuff that you've put out. And there is one sermon that I would like you to preach. And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is it. I'm dumbfounded how much I did not know about this sermon. I am embarrassed to tell you how much of the Jacob wrestling with God story I didn't know. Almost like a bell started ringing. I'm like, wait a minute, wait. What is that? I don't know what that story means. I've heard it. I could repeat it. Like I could have probably won like a Bible quiz competition when I was a kid. Let me tell you this. Most of the kids that can win Bible quiz competitions aren't Christians. Is that too? I mean, sorry if you guys are like wearing your ribbons to church this evening. Like sometimes knowing the answers is not enough is what I'm saying. This story, even how it's worded, is weird. I'm going to start with verse 24. So Jacob was left alone. If you do some research, here's what's interesting about Jacob. He was not like a real honest guy. It says that he sent his 2 wives out into danger first, and he started with, guess which one? The ugly one, just in case. Yeah, that the Bible does. I mean, so now he's by himself. He was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. What's that now? Now we're trained to know that this happened, but it doesn't give us any of the lead up. It says Jacob was alone, and he wrestled with a man. If we're being honest, there is a part of that story. It's like, I feel like massive amounts of detail got left out of that. I believe I'm good. Yeah, because I was raised in church. Faith. That's what you say when you don't know the answer. What is it? Faith. You got it. Faith. Jacob was left alone and wrestled with a man till daybreak. How did it start? Not important. Was this an ambush? Doesn't matter. Leaves him with a new name and as a broken shell. Sweet. Who approved the final edit on this? Who saw that full of the gaps and went, I like this. We're talking about dangerous prayers, and we're on the week of break me, and we know that that's what Jacob went through, but we don't necessarily understand how it happened. And I almost wonder sometimes if God doesn't bring us through a breaking process and we don't really understand it, but we pretend. Just living in faith, man. COVID, I don't know, pandemic, okay. Social distancing, and we're still doing that? Like, if we're being honest, I think there are times where God brings us through a breaking process, and what would be great is if we kind of understood a little bit of why. Just a little bit of context, like, God, I'll go through this, that's fine, but I wish I understood a little bit about what you were doing. Here we go. This story is written in what's called chiastic structure, and if you study the Torah, there are what's called chiasms, and a chiasm is a repetitive symmetry. It has an ascension, a point, and a descension, and it is a fascinating way of reading the Bible. And once you start to recognize chiasms or chiastic structures in the Word, what you start to realize is nothing's just thrown together. Nothing doesn't make sense. It's all intentional. In the Eastern culture, one of the things, I don't know if you guys listen to the Bema podcast. If you don't, this is one of the best podcasts I've ever heard as far as teaching the Torah from a rabbinical perspective. It's amazing. BEMA if you want to look it up. But in a chiasm, you ascend to a point. The middle point is really what the meaning is supposed to be delivered, and then a descension. And it's not, they don't just come right out and tell you. That's actually one of the things that in a Western culture we're not very good at is nuance. We're not like a real nuance-driven culture. We are like, get me in the drive-thru, give me a Happy Meal. Now I'm not hungry. Let's keep going. There is no slow process. But in the Eastern culture, you walk around something and you're left to derive the meaning from it. And once you notice a chiasm, what it means is what's in the middle, because once you know what's in the middle, then you understand the point of what's being told. What happens with Jacob is Jacob prays a dangerous prayer. We think that praying is, dear Lord, bless me. What's great, I love when people that are not from a church background, there's a sweetness to it when they'll pray, but they don't really know how. And so they're trying to think of all the church words that they remember their mom or like their grandpa's. Lord, bless. That's one, right? Bless the prayer. If we could break it down to its most simple form is you having a conversation in your head. And we've all been through, we don't recognize it as prayer. What prayer is a dialogue versus a monologue. When you think back and forth on a situation, you're going back and forth. What about this? No, actually this. Have you ever had a conversation with yourself and you're kind of going back and forth? There is an argument that is prayer. You are asking God for a revelation that's beyond your own understanding. And a monologue would be you're just the one talking. A dialogue is this back and forth. It's like the angel and the devil on each shoulder. There's an element of that is a prayer. Here's the chiasm. It's going to start here. We're going to go up, mirrored symmetry. Here it starts. Blessing. Starts with blessing. It says, then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. First point, blessing. Second point, verse 27, name. The man asked, what is your name? Says Jacob. Here's the centerpiece, the center of this. Blessing, name. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. We'll get to that. It's confusing. He wrestled with God and he won. I mean, that's the answer. That's the Bible quiz answer. Who wrestled with God and overcame? Jacob. Did you really think about what you just said? Doesn't matter. Did I get it right? There's the peak. Back to name. Jacob said, please tell me your name. Back to the blessing it ends with. But he replied, why do you ask me my name? Then he blessed him. It's confusing. If we were to break it open from the middle, we know that the moment where the name change takes place, that's the middle of the chiastic structure of the story. Genesis 25, you go back to Genesis 25, that said that Jacob and Esau fought in the womb. It says that before Jacob ever became a fully functioning human outside of the womb, he was wrestling with Esau. He wanted the birthright. He also says he wanted the responsibility. That's a separate point, but Jacob wanted the responsibility that Esau seemed to not want at all. He was gripping at the heel from birth. We know all this. Jacob is the name, and the Bible doesn't put much space between the concept of name and legacy. So when it says your name, like we have all kinds of crazy names. Like if you follow any of the celebrities, they're like, oh, I named my daughter Apple. Like, what? That's not the case in the Bible. The Bible was given like your legacy is going to be like you're given a name that meant, and here's the problem. We still do the same thing. We may not call it our name, but we have this identity we give ourselves. Philosophy says that it's your persona. You have this persona of who you pretend to be before you really discover who you actually are. You go through mimicking persona into identity. And so the persona would be the name that you've given yourself. We messed that up. When my little boy was born, this is terribly sad, and I'm going to say it as though it's not sad, but just know I realize that it is. When our little boy was born, we were talking about names, and it's kind of like it was our first kid, and so we're like, we can for real, we can name anything. You sure we're prepared for this? And the lady's like, yeah, we have some weird ones. We're like what? She goes, well, last week, Jet's birthday is November 6th. So on Halloween, the 31st, that week, a lady had came in and she had some mental problems. And she named her daughter, and I'm not kidding, Tire Grass Stain. And we're like, what? What? Keep in mind, I'm a preacher's kid. Nothing is serious. I'm like, what? Like, no, they can change it. But here's the problem. You can change it, but it's always on your birth certificate. Forever. So we've got this name thing really screwed up. So when we say that his name was Jacob, it wasn't a casual thing. It was like your legacy means that you are a usurper, a heel grabber. We do this now. We call ourselves lots of things. We call ourselves things like spouse or parent, student, businessman. I'm an athlete. The hero concept, nobody really ever calls themselves hero, but we like to think of ourselves as being like the hero of our story. We call ourselves a lot of things, and that's more along the lines. Jacob's name, his legacy was to supplant, to circumvent, to overreach. So he screws over his brother and steals his birthright, tricking his dad, brings his mom into the middle of it. It's this weird story. And now he leaves, he goes, and Laban, the old family, he finds a wife, he gets tricked. There's this trickery that seems to just follow him. He's either doing the tricking or getting tricked. He gets tricked into the more unfortunate looking wife. You say that, right? The Bible says it. Less fortunate looking, under fortunate in her looks. He's headed back in his full Jacobness, and he's about to be reunited with Esau. And so, like I said, he sends the less fortunate one out first. Like, stuff goes south. There you go, Leah. He is full on, his name had full on become his how. Now, real quick, I think this is important because you guys are in, I would say the average age, if I was looking around, is under 30, average. Until you're about 30, there's mimicking, and that's like children. Children will mimic. They watch a movie and they decide, I'm that person, right? They'll pick a character of a story that they connect with, and then they go act it out. And then, persona is kind of like, I think that I'm this person. And at 30, you start to move into more of identity, and there's a struggle that if you don't make that leap, that's where a lot of problems start. But the problem is when your name becomes your how, it's important that you get that one right. It is really important that you understand the idea of identity. We use things in 2022 like power, how much power. Children understand this. My daughter is in 4th grade and they go through power struggles. 4th grade. I wasn't a girl as a kid, which might surprise some of you, but little girls go through power structures in different ways than boys go through power structures. Little boys will just fight it out. I had 2 brothers. Power structures were easy. Who wins? But girls, their power structures look different. And that's a little bit more like frenemy type stuff. Appearance, boy, have we messed this one up in 2022. Social elements. We derive our name sometimes from our social beliefs, like things that we're just really passionate about and we want to get in the middle of, and we derive our identity from that. Work ethic. I think a lot of times people feel like that if they work the hardest, they're the most entitled. It's just a common thing that we go through. I think everybody goes through the persona of I'm the hard worker. And if I'm the hard worker, then I'm also the high deserver. And those two are not always connected. Actually, usually the opposite. Sometimes the people that work the hardest are the least rewarded. Image. This is a big one. We want to manage an image. How many times do you meet somebody and they're just dead set to tell you who they are? I'm just like, this is me. This is what you need to know about me. I'm just like managing an image. Instantly you're thinking of names. Don't say them. Jacobs was wrestling. He was very dishonest, but he's very smart. He's a very smart guy. And I think sometimes that's smart can be an advantage. Sometimes smart can be a disadvantage because you can get a lot further down the wrong road based on your elements. So Jacob, I think this is really important, is that Jacob had been given this name by a father who was responsible for giving him a legacy, and his father kind of gave him a screwed up legacy. And Jacob, fair enough, was like, all right, you want me to be a trickster and a usurper and a subplanner? You got it. And he full on goes into it. More to unpack with parent stuff than we should probably get into. Verse 30 talks about a Christophany. And here's what I love about a Christophany is that it is the times when Jesus, the person of Jesus, ready for this one, appears physically in the Old Testament. That messes with my whole understanding of time. Like we get into a lot there. But there are places, think about this. Remember in the story of the fiery furnace, it says, how many we throw in there? It said 3. And he goes, well, it seems like there's 4. And the 4th one looks like Son of Man. So somehow he knew that was Jesus. Samson, when they announced the birth of Samson to the parents, and it says he ascends to the Father, and they said, we've seen the face of God and we didn't die. Gideon, there's times, you can look this up. It is fascinating in the Bible. It is fascinating stuff. You can Google the word Christophany, Old Testament. It says, so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. Let's go back. Let's go back to verse 24. Because I feel like we fully unpacked the questions more than we fully unpacked the answers. Verse 24 says, so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket. Doesn't that sound like a contradiction? When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Let me say it this way. When the man saw that he couldn't win, he won. I had hip surgery in 2012. I've got really bad hips. I've got old people hips. And I was young at the time. I was younger. And when you tell people you had like a blown out knee, people are like, are you an athlete? Not true of hips. When you tell people you got bad hips, they're like, how old are you? My grandpa had that. They make socks with rubber on the bottom if you're slipping a lot. Like, it's not a cool injury to have at all. And I was too young to do a hip replacement, and so we did a bunch of meaningless stuff that never worked. But They tell you if you play baseball that the guys who hit the baseball the farthest are guys that have the most power in their core, fighters, the guys with the big knockout blows. It all comes from your hips. Your power, the power in your body is really located in your hips. You can be strong in your extremities, but your power is located in your hips. And so of all the things that Jesus could have touched in this moment, he doesn't go after Jacob's elbow. He doesn't touch him in the knee. He doesn't concuss him. And it doesn't say that he lost his temper. What a great week for Break Me. There are times that I engage with God and I've got an idea of what I want. And then in my life, God has gently and surgically broken me in ways that I can't recover from, that I didn't want. See, I think sometimes we go to God assuming that if we pray hard enough or we do stuff just exactly right enough, God will eventually align to us. He did it surgically, he did it physically, and what we're going to find out is he did it spiritually. Jesus surgically removes Jacob's ability to fight. Starting to make a little more sense, maybe. He didn't just remove his physical power, because if you have bad hips, there are things that you don't carry as far as potential. So not only does he remove the power, he removes the perception of power. This is a big deal. This is a really big deal. Because I hope you guys don't mind me referencing your age as much as I am. I mean, I'm going to keep doing it no matter what, but I just want you to know, I hope it's not offensive, but here's why I'm saying that. There is so much potential wrapped up in youth. When people, I'll be 40 this year, and when people my age and older start to think about youth, what we see is so much potential. That's only good if it's aimed the right direction. Otherwise, it's such a loss. Jacob had so much potential. I'm going to do this. I'm going to trick. I'm going to work. I'm going to outwork. I'm going to outpace. I'm going to trick, and he's smart, and I'm going to fight, and he was a fighter, and God takes that away. And he's like, well, wait a minute. A fighter seems like he's always looking for one thing. Anybody? Fight. I'm a fighter. It's his identity. I'm a fighter. What do? I fight. Jacob's battle really had never been against Esau, but when Esau was there, he saw Esau as, well, you're the guy. I'm a fighter, and you're here, so I want what you got. Almost like this, almost as though Jacob had decided it doesn't matter what comes up in my life. Smart people, I think, do this. I think smart people have a lot of confidence that they'll be able to figure it out. I don't know. I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. It'll be all right. I'll figure it out. Jacob had this ability to go, I'll outwork somebody or outfight. And a fighter with no power is a much different thing. Let me give you some real sound advice. If you don't have any power, don't be a fighter. Might save your life someday. Verse 26, then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. See, Jacob had just tricked his father out of what? A blessing. He tricked him under his own power. Him and his mom, they get together. They had a plan. He was wrestling. And all of a sudden, I'm going to guess it's probably the moment that he touches his hip. Jacob realizes he's in a fight that he didn't recognize. I think sometimes we have this idea of what's going to happen, and we're praying for it, and we're really believing God for it. And sometimes we'll even do crazy things like fasting. Did you guys hear about this? Is not anything to do with the sermon, but did you guys hear about, this is not funny. Someone died. It's not funny. But also, did you hear about the guy who died while he was fasting? It's a true story. You can Google it. He fasted for like 27 or 8 days and died. And he had gone on record as saying that he was trying to beat Jesus's record. It's true. Sometimes just because it's hard doesn't mean it's right. You know, I mean, that's, again, might be life-saving advice for someone. If you're on day 26, pull up. Everybody's going to Google that one of everything I say. Like, is that right? Try to beat Jesus' record. Yep. The man said, let me go, for it is not daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go. This one gets me because I feel like I've lived through this one. This is something I feel like I've experienced, is that Jacob was fighting and then God touches him and takes his power away. And it says that instantly Jacob's not fighting anymore. Now he's clinging. It was a desperation that was always present, but Jacob just didn't see it, because in the back of Jacob's mind, Jacob had a plan. I can get out of this. I can fight through this. I can figure it out. And the problem is there's some acceptance that comes in the breaking. When you pray, break me, what you're saying is, let me just warn you, you're not saying, oh God, break me in that way that'd be really good for Facebook and Instagram and something I could really brag up on my social media. When you say, God, break me in whatever way is necessary, it's usually the one place where you're like, accept my hips. How many times do you know somebody that their entire image and appearance was like their number one thing? Appearance is their number one thing. And they go through something and it's catastrophic and horrible, and it's this horrible learning process, but they always say the same thing. It's almost a blessing. I lost what I thought was important so I could discover what was even more important. Break me in a way that breaks me from my own self-reliance or my own self-dependence. Jacob is now not fighting, he's clinging. He's seen the truth, and now everything's in jeopardy, because Jacob goes, well, if I can't fight, then I don't know what to do. I don't know how. I'm going to see Esau tomorrow, like this. My brother will for sure win. He's hairy. He's a good hunter, and he's going to kill me. Most vulnerable, most defeated, and then it gets worse. We're about to hear a bell from a grave here again. The man asks, what is your name? And Jacob's like, shoot. Because Jacob had buried that. Jacob had taken his identity and he'd accepted it. I'm a fighter. He loses his ability to fight. What's your name? There was not a question that could have struck more to the heart of Jacob than that. Because he wasn't saying, tell me how to spell your name. I'm going to give you a certificate of you fought with me. He was saying, tell me your legacy. Jacob's like laying there with a wrench tip. He's like, this would have made a lot more sense 10 minutes ago. But my name is like fighter. But now I don't know who I don't know who I am now. I was intellectual, and then now I met people that are smarter than me. My name was hard worker, and then I met somebody that works harder than me. My name was athlete, and I met somebody that's more. So I don't know my name anymore. I mean, my name's Jacob, but remember, this is, in the chiasm, this is the story. Everything else, the blessing, the name, the blessing, that's all. What is going on in that moment is an identity exchange. It's an identity, it's an exchange, because he goes, my name is Fighter. And God goes, okay, but that name represents a lifetime of hurts and identity and inferiority complexes, and his identity was buried and it was settled. And he goes, okay, but go dig it back up, because I don't think that's your identity. I think that's your persona. I think that's what you've believed about yourself, and maybe your dad believed it about it. Maybe your mom believed it about you. Maybe you had a professor that believed it about you. Maybe you had friends that believed it about you, but that doesn't matter, because in a moment of an identity exchange, you have to give that one up. You have to give that one back. Verse 28. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. You will get some head scratchers from people who study the Bible on that one. I want to do a real quick. How much time do I have? I'm okay. It's not what anybody wants to hear. Oh, I got plenty of time. We're just getting started. If I were to ask you, you can talk to me after the service if you want to sort of flesh this out. But if I were to ask you to take a piece of paper and a pen and write down 3 lies in your imagination right now, if you were to do this, if you were to write down 3 lies that you believe about yourself, And we've all got them. Everybody's got them. Everybody's got things. I'll tell you mine. My number one thing is failure. I always struggle with feeling like I'm a failure. I can't even fully explain it. I think it comes with being like an ambitious person. But if you were to write down 3 lies, take a minute just for a second. You got a piece of paper, you got a pen, and you were to write down 3 lies. Your list is your list. You don't have to tell anybody else what it is. If you had a moment where you're wrestling with Jesus and he goes, what's on your list? If you were to hand Jesus your list, now Jesus is holding your list of the 3 lies that you believe about yourself. I've never done this. I've never done this in all the time speaking. I'm going to ask for some answers from the audience. And I know this can get crazy because you just don't ever do this. It's like lesson 1, don't invite people to speak because you don't know what people are going to say. I'm going to risk it. I don't want to know what's on your list. I just want to know, if you were to hand that list to him, what do you think Jesus would do with it? I've asked this of a lot of people. What do you think when you hand Jesus, here's my lies, here's identity, here's my identity. This is the identity I've been carrying with me. These are the lies I've believed about myself my whole life. These are the things right here that I struggle with. These are things that I believe about myself that I know can't possibly be true because you didn't create me to be all these things, but these are the, you hand it to Jesus. What would Jesus do with that list? Just two answers. 2 people tell me what you think Jesus would do with that list. I know you're nervous. I know I'm me too, because I don't know what you're going to say. It might be terrible. What do you think when you hand Jesus that list? What do you think he would do with it? Okay. Okay. What's interesting to me is that when Jacob gives his name to Jesus, Jesus gives something back, but it's not the lies. There's an exchange. He exchanges it. He says, I'm going to take your name, but I'm going to give you a name, and it means wrestles with me. Overcame means, it doesn't mean he beat God at a wrestling match. That's important to know. He didn't beat God at a wrestling match. It says that he never gave up. He didn't overcome Jacob. He didn't destroy Jacob's core. It means in the heart, Jacob went from fighting to clinging, but Jacob never left. Because if when Jacob realized it was God, he could have limped away. Like, You know how I know that people can limp and be scared of something and limp away? Because those bull riders I was talking about a minute ago, every now and then they get hurt and they jump up limping away. Overcome means losing to ourselves and submitting to him. Jacob went from wrestling to clinging, but he stayed engaged. I think there's so much value in that. I think there's value in the concept of we are wrestling with God. We are clinging to God, but we're not leaving. We're not selling out and running off and trying to figure it out for ourselves, because Jacob, that's what Jacob had been doing. He has this engagement with God and he goes from wrestling with him to clinging to him. Verse 29, Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Oh, I love this so much, because Jacob's like, well, what's your name? And he's like, come on. You know. Jacob's like, I know, but you asked mine and it just felt fair. Felt like I should ask you. Then he blessed him there. Name, blessing, identity exchange, name, blessing. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose over him as he was passing Peniel, and he was limping. Still limping. Always limping. You know why he was still limping? My opinion, my thought. You know why I think he was still limping, even when the story was over and God's like, okay, you got it? Got it. Okay, exchanged, identity exchange. Yep, great. There's a story about Elijah and Elisha when Elijah calls Elisha. Bible scholars, am I getting that right? I'm saying J-S, yeah. Because J becomes 4S in the alphabet because Bible quiz. It's a thing. Really picking on the Bible quizzers tonight. I don't know, I'm sorry. Elijah says, come follow me. It's a lifelong commitment and you're never going to come back. And Elisha goes, wait here. It says that he goes home. He takes his oxen and his plow, because that's what he was doing when Elijah found him. He was plowing, because sometimes God sends you through jobs that don't make any sense to prepare you for a job that's completely separate. But there was times, and he comes back and He goes, what, you ready to go? And he goes, oh, yeah, just let me go back and kill these oxen, these stupid oxen. I'm going to cut them up. I'm going to 1017 project them. That's the name of our cattle project. We feed people. It's a funnier joke if you understood that. And do you know what he used for the wood to cook them? The plow. I love that because what he said was, I assume there's going to be difficulty in following you. I assume that if this is a call of God, it includes seasons of suffering and difficulty and pain and strife and all the things I really don't like. All the list of things that are on my things I don't want. It's going to include that. And I don't want to be tempted to come back. I don't want anything to come back to. I don't want any bridges home. I don't want to come back. I want to make sure that these oxen, and this is never a temptation for me. So he used the wood from the plow to cook his oxen, feed his family. Peace. See you again. Never. I think when Jacob becomes Israel, wrestles with God, and leaves and he's still limping, God says, and just to make sure that you're never tempted to become a fighter again, just so that you're never tempted to go back to the identity of appearance or image or athlete or businessman or husband or spouse. Those are all roles. So that you're never tempted to take those on as an identity, so that you're not tempted to go from identity back to persona. I'm going to remove the thing that gave you so much of an advantage in your persona so that you're forced to live, forced, encouraged, whatever the case may be, so that you are more incentivized to live in your identity versus your persona. Let me tell you why that's encouraging for me, because as a preacher's kid, I feel like I wrestle with God a lot. And I was always sort of chastised for it. I was not raised in like a real... Is this going to be played online anywhere? I wonder if my mom and dad are going to see it. I wasn't raised in that, like a wrestle with God environment. I was raised in a submit to God environment. You submit. Well, what if I have questions? Then you submit. Well, what if there's gaps in the Bible where it says that he wrestled with God and he lost and he won at the same time? Do you submit? Okay. Let me guess. If I don't, there's consequence. Yep, good. Okay, that's what I assume. But God says that he named his people wrestles with God. That means this: when we're engaged with God and going, I don't get this, I don't understand this, I don't even like this, I don't agree with this. God's going, good. You're there. You're in the space of wrestling with me in a space that is very okay. God, why would you break me? I was going to be a fighter. Why would you remove me from my position in ministry? That's what I was going to pay my bills with that. Why would you let the church die? Why would you let my grades? I was trying. Why didn't you make me smart enough to pass these classes? You know, they say that people that go to Harvard that are in the lower echelon of who gets into Harvard are less successful than people who are at the higher echelon of lesser schools because they get to Harvard and for the first time in their entire lives, they meet people that are smarter than they were. And they don't know what to do with it. There are times where we're like, God, why did you break me? We're wrestling with God and we are right in the middle of the will of God because God is performing an identity exchange. I take so much peace in knowing that when I'm going through the battle of struggling, I don't know. Why this? I don't know. Why that? This doesn't seem right. That in the questions, I go from wrestling to clinging. There is healing in that process. Do you know what the word Muslim means? And this is not about which one's better. That's not what I'm saying. I just want to make sure that we understand what we are. That if we're a Christian, if we are a Christ follower, if we came from God's chosen people of the wrestling, if that's the DNA that we are birthed out of, you know what the word Muslim means? Any scholars in here? Submission to God. Submitted to God. Don't ask questions. Just do it. Just obey. And I wonder sometimes if we struggle to get to the identity exchange part of wrestling with God because we've been told that we're supposed to submit to God and we just buried that so deep that we don't even hear the bell ringing where God's going, let's go back. Look deeper. Look closer. What are we doing? Let me pray. Lord, I wonder sometimes if we're not caught under submission to a principle that's not even from you. God, I wonder if sometimes what you're trying to do is bring us through a breaking that gives us freedom, a breaking that doesn't inhibit, but God, a breaking that gives freedom. Lord, give us that, I pray, as a optimistic outlook. Let us look forward with excitement of what's on the other side of breaking. That's what the cross is. It's about death and a breaking, and from that, life that comes out of it. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.